Before going into any fight in Opera Omnia, a very important aspect of it comes before even starting the match: team building. How you build your team will almost single-handedly decide whether you win or lose. For newer players, hopefully this video will give you some good ideas on how to better make a team. A few disclaimers before we start. There are no absolute rules to team building. A lot of the time, it's a case-by-case scenario for the boss that you're trying to beat. I'm not saying that you should follow my video. This is only a guideline that I personally follow for me. In a more general sense of team building, I use the following type of units: a DPS, a support, and a third slot utility. Additionally, I try to have at least some sort of imperil enchant in my party, but I also try to make it no more than one main element, as two or more will clash. Lastly, I like to have at least one of my units who will serve as my main FR, the one to start my force times. I ideally would like the FR to have very easy conditions that everyone in my party can fulfill. If you have a team where their FRs don't really match with each other, your numbers and damage are going to significantly decrease. You do not need to follow any of them to a T at all, but the biggest suggestion I could give would be to make sure you have an easy FR in your team that everyone can match with. Now that we got the general team strategies out of the way, let's talk more in depth about the two main types of teams in Opera Omnia. That is, of course, offense and defense. Offensive teams often take the initiative, attack more than the enemy, and sometimes not even let the enemy act at all. Also, offensive teams tend to have some form of off-turn damage in them, be it traps, follow-ups, or linked attacks. Defensive teams, on the other hand, mostly play the slower game. These focus on tanking enemy hits and, more often than not, counter-attacking. Using a defensive team, you want the enemies to be the ones taking the most turns in the fight. Now that we got the main definitions out of the way, let's get to the team building formats that I personally use when making my parties. Starting with offense. First and foremost, I like to have at least one main DPS, the one that will be dealing most of the damage in the fight. Some examples of this would be Astos, Jill Nabbit, Anna Crow, and Sid Reigns. For boss rush teams, I like to have my DPS unit on the faster side, like Lightning, Tifa, Aranea, and Sephiroth. I also like to use linked and off-turn damage a lot. I try to have at least one, but I've used two or even a whole team of off-turn attackers before. It's one of the more fun units in my opinion to use. Some offensive off-turn damagers include Noctis, Leo, Weiss, Dorgon, and Ace. Another unit I really enjoy using are what I call enemy disablers. These types of characters I also find really fun. The four main ones I want to talk about. First is units who protect your party from getting debuffed from the enemy. These units are when enemy debuffs get very annoying or simply just take the worry of getting debuffed off your shoulders. Some debuff protectors to note: Weiss, Aerith, Lena, and Selphie. Or make the enemy deal 0 damage. Therefore, when the enemy does end up moving, either organically or by turn warping themselves, they don't deal damage to your party. Examples would be Setzer, Kater, Iris, and Golbez. Third are characters who make the enemy outright unable to attack or even move at all. You have paralysis or confusion units like Fusoya, Shantoto, and Mog, units who give party evasion such as Yuri and Rydia, and also HP silencers like Pain and Arciela. Lastly, you have the buff preventers and dispellers for in case enemies do give themselves annoying buffs. Example of these would be Vincent, Beatrix, Ferris, Balthier, and Yuffie. Moving on, a bit more on the niche side, but especially in fights where I really don't want the enemy to take a turn, I bring a turn manipulator to help make sure that I'm always the one moving. Now, there are both self-manipulators who turn warp the party like Rem, Aphmau, Iris, Dorgon, and Ignis, and enemy manipulators who delay and delete turns like Quistis, Anna Crow, Minwoo, Cloud of Darkness, and Cloud. Lastly, for offensive teams, I recommend one or two supports. These are to make sure your units are healthy and also dealing the most damage possible. In order to reach force time, you can go the organic route, or you can use FR chargers. Keep in mind, other types of units can also force charge like Rubicante and Jill Nabbit, but generally speaking, most chargers are often support units. Some good chargers of note are Pinello, Charlotta, Rem, and Aerith. Next, you have the healers to help make sure you're not dying, and also for HP mission requirements. Some examples are Rosa, Lena, Aerith again, and Garnet. You have cleansers in case you got some really nasty debuffs on you that you want off. Some good cleansers are Pain, Mog, and Yuna. Lastly, you have the straight up damage enablers. Now, support units have stat boosts for Brave and HP damage, of course, but what I mean by damage enablers are units that guarantee you deal max damage. The two ones to note are Kina and Setzer. Let's go to defense, starting with the most important, having a tank or evasion unit. These units are what make the enemy constantly taking turns, not kill you. They're the core part of defensive teams. Sometimes, you don't even need other party members if your tank is strong enough. You can go solo. Example of these types of units are Rubicante, Warrior of Light, Zac, Orin, Kelger, and Cater. The next best thing in a defensive team is of course a counterattacker to attack the enemy when you're not moving. A lot of tanks already have counterattacking built into them like Rubicante, Orin, and Gladio, but in this case, the more the merrier, I'd say. Some good counterattackers that you could add would be Core, Minwoo, and Beatrix. If you need an extra bit of damage, you can add on a DPS. However, for defensive teams, it helps to not have attackers that are fast. Some good ones to use would be Astos, Rex, and Golbez, although be careful with Rex because one of his skills does make enemies attack him instead in the tank. Lastly, consider a good support unit to finish off your team. Having a unit to heal you, for example, if your party does end up getting hurt, is a good idea. Some support units even have counter damage or off turn as well, such as Kina and Garnet. Now let's move to more specific teams, compositions that are built around niche categories or even units themselves. It's not all of them, of course, but these are just some examples to give you a good idea. First, you have the break teams, parties geared around breaking the enemy. You'll want a DPS unit that can consistently break, such as Lightning, Aranea, Null, or Strago, and you'll want a break enabler for your party, such as Sephiroth or Null. To tack on that last spot, you can use a support unit or FR charger. Interesting fact, Kina is actually a great option to use here, as she can AoE break both from her EX and FR attack. Next team idea is HP and Brave Command. It's pretty straightforward. These teams are made up of units that often rely on their HP and Brave commands to deal damage, or they also provide big bonuses for others that use those commands. The two main units for this type of team are Queen and Ursula, as both of them do regularly use those options, but also provide huge HP cap ups for those types of attacks. If you can pair them together, that's the best case scenario, but even just one of them will still be strong. To pair with them, very simple, bring a unit that will regularly use those HP and Brave commands. It doesn't even need to necessarily be a DPS unit, as if you have Queen, she already deals loads of damage by herself. Example of good units to pick here would be Lena, Rosa, Vivi, and Renault and Machina, but those two are fairly out of date at the moment. Next are the teams built around certain units. Let me say this first. You can build around any unit in the game. You can even build for Thancred. These are just examples of units that really do work best when you center around them. Reno, for example, works extremely well when paired with a tank or evasion, and either a support or a counterattacker. You generally don't want a DPS unit with him because he will be delaying the entire party with his BT attack, so your attacker won't have that many opportunities to move. Some tanks or evasion units that he pairs beautifully with Kelger, Gladio, and Orin. For a support unit or counterattacker, really good options would be Core and Kino. Reno can work with other elemental units like Rubicante, Minwoo, or Beatrix. However, depending on the FR being used, the elements might clash. And more specifically, if you're pairing him with Rubicante, you might need some form of True Fire enchant. The main man himself, Astos. The way his damage works is entirely based off of his max Brave. Building around him is simple. You just need units or calls that help boost his max Brave. Other units that help as well are FR chargers like Aerith or Penelo, and supports that can provide heal, debuff protection, etc., such as Aerith, Garnet, and Yuna. Aerith works amazing with Astos, by the way. Last note, if you plan on using Astos as the main FR, be sure to have a team of magic users. So that is my team building guide for y'all. Hopefully you got some good information out of it. If you disagree with anything or felt that something was missing, please be sure to leave a comment below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!